This is the story of Blair Atholl Station. It is also my story. The railway station was hugely important to the village and to all the people who came here. It opened more than 160 years ago. The first train made the journey from Perth to Inverness in the year 1863, coming through Blair Atholl on its way. My story doesn't begin until a bit later. My dad first met my mum at the station in the summer of the year 1943. She was just 18. She had left school and was working at the station. This was during the Second World War, when women did jobs they hadn't been allowed to do before. My dad was 28. He was a forester from Canada and lived in a camp just outside Blair Atholl with 200 other Canadian foresters, and it was their job to cut down trees. My mum and dad got married and I was born the next year. The station was a busy place in the 1940s. My grandfather also worked for the railway. He was a lengthman, also called a ganger. Every day he walked the railway line from what was the north signal box, it's gone now, to the railway bridge and fixed anything that needed fixing. Like many folk, he had travelled to Blair Atholl to work on the railway. He and Granny lived in a small cottage beside the platform. There was no inside toilet. You had to go out to a shed in the yard or use a potty under the bed. There was no bath and no electricity. Blair Atholl Station was important because it had an engine shed for the big engines that pushed and pulled the steam trains up and over the Remochter Pass. This was the highest point on the railway across the UK. My pals and I used to get lifts on the big banking engines as they went up the steep hill and back down again. I remember pushing one of them around on the turntable outside the engine shed. You could do it with one hand, even though it was a massive heavy machine. As the Second World War drew to an end, my dad was sent back to Canada, leaving Mum and me behind. I was just a baby and we lived at my grandparents' house. Mum and Dad wrote letters to each other. Then in the year 1946, Mum and I sailed on a great big ship to join my dad in Canada. There were 807 mums and children on the ship. I was too wee to remember this, but I love Canada. I started school there, and then 6 years later, we all came back to my grandparents' house in Blair Atholl. I have lots of happy memories of that time. The station was my family and my playground. My grandpa and my uncles all worked on the railway, and everybody knew me and kept an eye on me. I spent all my free time mooching around the station yard, or on the engine shed, or the signal boxes. I know you can't do this today. You can really only go to the station with an adult, because there's so many fast trains going through the station, and the station building is closed. I went to high school in Perthshire on the train, because there were no buses and hardly anyone had a car. We used to go on the steam train, and it had the carriages to ourselves on the way there, so we got up to a lot of mischief. The guard's van was at the back of the train, and it carried everything from letters, parcels, newspapers to chickens, milk churns, and even dead rabbits strung up by their feet. The guard waved the green flag and blew a whistle when the train was ready to leave. A lot changed in the 1960s. Steam engines were replaced by diesel trains, which were lighter and cleaner and cheaper to run. This was a good thing. Steam trains had been messy and needed a lot of coal to keep them going. But we hated the diesels. They were more like small buses on wheels, and not nearly as exciting as the steam trains. They didn't need so many people to run them or to look after the track, so people lost their jobs and some had to leave the area to find work. Many more people were travelling by car, so new roads were built and old roads were improved. Then something happened that made things much worse for the railways. After Dr. Beecham's report, More than 6,000 miles of track were closed down. People are still sad and angry about this today. Dalnaspittle, Struan, Killiecrankie stations all closed in 1965 and their platforms were removed. People lost their jobs. Family moves away and schools closed down. Blair Atholl Station suffered in the 1960s. The Duke's private waiting room was demolished. For a time the engine shed was used for tatty dressing, when women and children sorted the newly picked potatoes on a conveyor belt. Then when a new A9 road was built in the 1980s, the main road didn't go through the village anymore, and Blair Atholl became a much quieter place. The station building was closed. My mum's cousin, Jimmy McBain, was the last to go. At least the signal box survived. But now for some great news from Blair Atholl Station. I've joined a group called Friends of Blair Atholl Station. We've been planting bulbs and flowers and looking after the notice board, platform and little waiting shed. We plan to raise money so that the station building is opened again. It won't be a station where you can buy tickets, but it will be a place for local people and visitors to enjoy. Why don't you ask a parent, grandparent or a teacher to take you to have a look at the station? You won't be able to get inside the building yet, but you'll be able to think about what it was like all those years ago and imagine what it might be like in the future.